Echeverias are easy to grow and fun to work with, and I'm going to show you how to propagate echeverias from leaf cuttings. Succulents are very popular because they're easy to grow, they don't need a lot of water or fertilizer, and they come in a variety of shapes, sizes, and colors. One of the largest genuses of succulents is Echeveria. Echeveria are identified by this rosette form, which it consists of a spiral of these thick, fleshy, spoon-shaped leaves. Echeverias come in many different sizes and colors, and with a rosette form, the whole plant ends up looking kind of like a flower. But these flowers don't fade. They're beautiful all year long. I'm going to show you how to propagate Echeveria by leaf cuttings, which has 4 stages. 1 is taking the cutting, 2 is callousing the cuttings, 3 planting them to root them out, and 4 planting them in the pot. I'm going to be demonstrating with one of my favorite Echeverias. This is Echeveria Dondo. I like it because it's very slow growing, so it keeps its shape, which is nice when you're making a succulent wreath or a vertical garden. So propagation starts with the taking of the cuttings. So if you look at this plant, you can see how these lower leaves are older and yellower. The best cuttings are the vigorous cuttings along in this center part. So I'm just going to remove these older leaves. And you always take cuttings from the bottom of the Echeveria. They spiral up, but so it's easier to just go from the bottom up. So now we're into these vigorous leaf cuttings, and the way to remove one cleanly so that you don't leave any leaf tissue on the plant is to just a back and forth motion, and it comes right off. And as I said, you just spiral along from the bottom back and forth. Now this plant is out of a pot, but if it were in a pot, you would just turn the pot on the side and you don't have to destroy the mother plant. You can keep it rooted in its pot, but you can still get these cuttings from it. The next step of propagation is callousing these cuttings. To callus the cuttings, you put them in some sort of container. I'm just using a pie tin here. I put down a little paper towel because I like to create a little humidity. I live in a dry environment. But we're going to put these in this tin for about 4 weeks. And during that time, we put them in a cool, not too hot, not too cold environment with filtered light. You don't want them in direct sunlight, and we don't want them in complete darkness. So some light. You can do this inside. You can do it in a greenhouse or an unheated greenhouse, or you can do them in a little protected corner on the outside of in your garden or outside of your house. If you have them in, say, a humid environment like a greenhouse, you may not even have to mist them at all. But I like to do it about every 3 days or so in the dry, unheated greenhouse that I do these in. You don't want them to be sopping wet. You want them to dry out in between mists. So I would guess you would do it every few days. These are some leaf cuttings I took about a month ago, and you can see that they've changed a little bit from their original shape. They're a little bit more spoon-shaped, and they have a little bit of darkening on the end. You can see a few that didn't make it. That's okay. Most of them did. And then if you can look really closely, you can see that they have little roots starting to come out of that calloused end. Stage 3 is planting out these calloused cuttings. I'm going to show you 2 different methods. One is in a seed propagation tray, which usually come in a larger size, so I've cut it down to a manageable size for me. And the other is an open tray. You can use anything, you can buy them, but I like to use things that I have around the house. Another option would be a mushroom container. You could poke some holes in the bottom for drainage and just use that. So in an open tray, I've made these little supports. These are just chopsticks from takeout that I've cut down to size that I can put in here. You could use bamboo stake or anything cut down to size. And then I make a little trench in front of it. You can use a knife if you want to do that, just to stir it up a little bit. And that's so that we can support, as I said, these are very spoon shaped, and if we just lay them on the ground, you see that root sticking up in the air where it might dry out. Whereas with these stakes and the little trench, you can stand them up in your mix. You can even go the other direction. They don't have to be in any particular orientation. And then after we've planted these, and you can do another row, and just fill it right up. After planting, then we'll mist to water these in. Trying not to knock them over. You don't want to use a forceful spray of water because you just blow everything out of the tray. So some kind of gentle watering. Okay, moving on to the seed starting tray. What I like about this tray, two things. One, I don't need the support stakes because the sides of the tray support the cutting. The other thing I like is once these have rooted out, each plant has its own contained root ball so that they aren't as stressed when I remove them as in the open tray where I have to tease the roots out from each other. The roots tend to grow in together a little bit. So the reason I like to water these in is it pushes some of the smaller soil particles around the base of the cutting, and it just gives them a little bit more humidity so that they'll root in nicely. The soil mix that I'm using for the rooting out of these cuttings is just a seedling starting mix that I've added a little bit of perlite to. But you would be fine just using a seedling starting mix. The seed starting mix doesn't have fertilizer in it. That's important because at this stage of growth, they really are inhibited more by fertilizer than they are helped by it. So now we're going to place these cuttings in an area where we want to optimize their rooting out, which would be a warm place, but not hot or cold. If it's cold, it'll just take a little bit longer, but you could probably do that too. For instance, inside in a window that doesn't get direct sunlight, that would be good. I have an unheated greenhouse. I just put them out on the bench there. In a place in your garden that maybe is protected by an awning or something that is a little bit warmer, that would also be satisfactory. So we said from taking the cutting to having a plantable cutting was about 4 weeks. Now from planting that cutting into calloused cutting into rooting media to this final product here takes about 6 months, maybe longer, depending on the conditions that you plant them in. These actually are over a year old. It's a little old. I just need to get around to planting them. But what you end up with in the seedling tray is a nice root system here. You can see that there are nice roots in there, and it's just ready to get transplanted into a pot or into your garden or whatever it is that your final condition is. All right, now we have our rooted cutting that you can see it's lost the original leaf that the cutting was made from, and it's just a perfect little rosette, and we're going to plant this into a little pot. You could plant it into your garden or into another container. And I'm just I have a little soil in the bottom of the pot, and then I'm just going to fill it on all sides, trying to center it. This media I'm using is just a cactus media. You can make your own, but I tend to just buy it. And there he is, cute as can be. Thanks for watching, and I hope you learned how to propagate Echeverias so that you can play with them and grow them in your garden.